Kia ora koutou, my name is Monique. I'm a collection manager in the documentary heritage team at Auckland Museum, and this is my colleague Phil, who is a data analyst in the collection information and access team. And today we're just going to give a very brief overview of a migration project that we just recently completed, where the documentary heritage team moved all of their object records to Vernon from Enmagic's Presto and Genie library management system. So the documentary heritage collections consist of manuscripts, museum archives, photographs, paintings and drawings, ephemera and publications. And each of these collections had their own data set in Presto and Genie. So towards the end of 2020, the museum formally went about preparing to migrate all DocH records to Vernon, which was already being used to catalogue the other museum collections. We had been using Enmagic's Presto and Genie since 2014, and it was mostly chosen for functionality with library processes, so things like lending and interloans. Unfortunately, it wasn't well set up for unpublished collections, and we were behind on a few updates as well. So it's for this reason, as well as having all museum collections on the same CMS, that we decided to move to Vernon. And it makes searching and linking between departments a lot easier, and it has allowed the museum to update the API to run more efficiently. Unfortunately, the record data existed mostly in free text fields, with inconsistencies in how some of the fields had been used over the years. So there was a massive amount of cleaning to do, as well as the field mapping, creating new terms in Vernon authority fields. And so I just have a few slides to show you what Presto looked like and what we were dealing with. So this is how you would view an object record. Only the fields with data in them are displayed. And we had tabs just like you do in Vernon, where it's the same thing again, where you have all the data appearing on one screen. And this is a search screen for the ephemera data set. Each data set had its own search screen that you could either Boolean or keyword search on any field, and you could use the various lists to search that way. The little red box up in the corner, you could do complex searching in there as well. And this is the edit screen for an object record. Some of the fields have value lists, but they were mostly permissive. Only a handful were strict authority lists. So this access notes field, that was one of only a handful of strict authority lists, how most of them are in Vernon. And the creator field here, it had a value list, but you could also add names in a free text box, and those names would be added to the record, but they wouldn't be added to the validation list. This is the publication screen, the Genie database, which sits within Presto, but is also sort of outside of it. It was a bit confusing at times. This is a search screen, and then on the side here you have all the usual library functions: lending, serials check-in, interloans, and borrowers, so people who are lending the books from us, were all saved in there. So the first stage of the project involved workshopping with the collection managers about mapping to Vernon and how to go about cleaning the data. We tried to align our records with how other museum departments have been using Vernon already, which was really tricky at times coming from a library and archives database. As I mentioned, we were dealing with quite messy data that sat within a lot of free text fields. We ended up using Excel and OpenRefine to clean and organize the data ourselves. The majority of the cleaning involved going through the free text data that needed to become authority terms, determining what those terms should be, and if there wasn't a corresponding one already in Vernon, looking at adding new ones based on industry thesauri where possible. We then went through and matched them all with the Vernon system IDs before importing, and this was by far the most time-consuming part of the project. We imported 330,000 object records. 411 individual fields were mapped and cleaned across the 6 data sets. So for example, 6 different date fields were mapped to the one date field in Vernon, but because of the discrepancies in how some of the fields were used by each data set, they weren't always mapped to the same field. And 53% of these fields required matching to new and existing authority data. We imported almost 100,000 person records, mostly from the publications data. More than we would have liked are now duplicate records, but there wasn't enough time or resource to go through every name and definitively match them to the existing person records. We did it for as many as was feasible, and we also had Vernon help us with a good chunk of them. We created 109,000 new authority terms, and approximately 11 million data points have been imported via XML. The publication data set was worked on last and was by far the most complex and difficult data. Some of the issues we had to resolve include how to do the lending process, so loaning books to staff. How do we make the bibliographic and item records work? There's no call number field. There aren't enough fields in Vernon to map the publications data to. There's a vast number of unique creators, and there was no obvious way to do serials check-in, and we still haven't resolved that one actually. Some of the solutions we did come up with, the lending process is controlled by the location function. It's really straightforward and works well for us. The call number, like with other object IDs, has been added to the other ID table. When there was no corresponding field in Vernon, we added the data to some of the free text fields and have added a prefix, so we know what that data is, and we know that that's not ideal, and hopefully going forward we'll be able to do something a bit cleaner. And as I said, we carried out extensive cleaning and matching of the creator data, but still ended up with numerous duplicate records. And then we also utilized some spare fields that weren't being used by anyone. They said they had a purpose, but there was no data whatsoever in them. So we took those and created new authority lists. We also used 2 of the user-defined fields, and we had 2 custom windows created. This is how bib and item records work, if you know what those are, library people out there. We have been using the group member function. So on the left is the old Genie record. There are 6 copies of this book, and they were previously catalogued within the bib record in Genie, and now in Vernon they are linked to a top level record and each have their own object record, which obviously has greatly inflated our record numbers. To deal with the huge number of person records, we have added a prefix using a user symbolic and a management flag. So this way staff can immediately see that the person record is a new one, and to check whether there is already an existing record. So here Roger Nietzsche is in there twice, but if there wasn't a duplicate name in there, that we're encouraging staff to go and delete the management flag, then the prefix will disappear, and we know that that name is not a duplicate that we have added in as part of the migration. This is an example of a workaround we came up with for the publisher data. RDA rules dictate that you transcribe the publisher information exactly as it appears in the publication. This meant there were numerous iterations of the same publisher, but we didn't want to import them into Vernon as a person record. So instead we created an authority field using one of the spare user-defined fields. And as you can see, otherwise we would have had to add all of those versions of Auckland University Press.
We had a plan which worked. The devil, as always, was in the detail. A large part of the migration was data cleaning, and so the collection managers put in a huge effort to get their data as clean as feasible, after which we locked down any changes to Presto. We imported one collection at a time, and we started by importing just the skeletal data, the most important stuff, so that there was a record in which we could put all the other fields data. We imported the latter in small stages because like some of the imports, even then, took over a weekend just by themselves. And it's easy to undo mistakes if you'd have a little bit. We also created a master XML import configuration to capture all of the fields that we would be using. An important thing was to decide what criteria we were going to use to define the project's completion. So while there is still a bit of minor work to do, we've got all of our records transferred to Vernon, and sufficient data has been imported to allow the records to be used, both by the collection managers and our online collections website. Right at the beginning, we created a mapping table to capture the Presto field headings, convert them to generic terms, and match them with the appropriate Vernon internal field name. We also had a column to assign a priority stage from 1 to 5. So stage 1 included the important skeletal record data and any field that did not require more than minor cleaning. These are the tools we used during the migration. Note that if you're using Excel, that 32-bit Excel can only use 2 gigs of RAM and struggles a bit with big data sets. 64-bit can use all the RAM you have, so pressure your IT people. I did originally use OpenRefine for grouping person and place names, but found I could do it more efficiently in Excel, even with the 32-bit version. OpenRefine is worth exploring though, especially for large data sets. Use ChatGPT. It's the new thing. Version 4 is much more powerful, and it's great for puzzling out the best formulas and code to use in Excel. The 2 most valuable skills you'll need in Vernon are XML importing and List Manager, so get familiar with them. People ask about Power BI. We haven't used it, but you may find it useful. Why Excel? Everyone has it, and like many programs, we don't use its full capabilities. Always ask, how can I have Excel do this for me? As far as OpenRefine and Power BI, they're powerful tools, but I found that virtually everything can be done in Excel. Again, ChatGPT, why should I use Excel? And it pops up with all sorts of reasons. But I'm just biased. These are some of the questions I've asked ChatGPT. It works well for other programs as well. And of course, when it's time for a webinar, it can help your writer's block. It can be difficult finding the Vernon field you want. This record, for example, has data on 15 of Vernon's standard windows, and custom windows allow us to see all the priority fields in one place. This is the unpublished collections window, and we have a separate one for the published collection. You can see too that we can pull in information onto the custom window from any of the other fields. Because we had a list of generic elements in our mapping table, we created a master XML import configuration file that included all of the permutations. A later Vernon upgrade now allows that to be done via the fields import button. And this is also very useful for bulk adding additional elements. The internal field mapping is also done on our mapping table. For importing, you simply tick the fields you want to use and make sure they're all in the source file. The parameters page includes a free text field, which I use to add notes, tips, file paths, and so on. But perhaps of more importance is the ability to document information on each import. And I highly recommend creating a suitably named saved list for each import. You may find my revised XML generator file useful, and there's a link to my February client webinar on the last slide. We had several issues during the importing. I won't go into great details of these, but one of them was a spreadsheet of the publication's subtitles that had many odd characters, like these. However, these did not come from the original Presto data. For some reason, Excel converted them, even though it normally accepts them. So we had to do a bit of tedious character matching there. Some publications fields imported to Vernon, but were in the wrong records for a reason I haven't yet determined. These led to learning the esoteric Vernon secrets I call the wipe tools. You can see Vernon about these. And of course, with the person data duplication, sometimes the problem was actually in the Presto data. So I give you Wickham and Toombs. Sorry about the list here, but these are some of the issues we faced that greatly added to the project time. So think about these before you start your project. BAU was a major problem, as although our collection managers, Monique and I, put in a tremendous effort, we still had our usual work to do. So we could have done with at least 2 extra migration dedicated staff. And this is one of the big takeaways. We did do our Vernon training well though, planning sessions with Vernon staff for all our new users. So here are the links I mentioned earlier with our email addresses. We're happy to offer any advice and questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monique and Phil. That was so insightful, a really comprehensive overview of this massively challenging project, which I can see is it's just been so complex. I really like seeing all of the features of Vernon that you're using that I help you with the import and managing the data. So I noted user symbolics, the management flags, the group and member records, using XML import, and also having those details on each XML import configuration so that you know how it's been set up and how to use it. Really good reference and note-taking. And I'd now like to open up to questions from our audience. We have one question so far. Let me just check. So from Richard Ferguson, did the drive to migrate across to Vernon come from a users and stakeholders, or was it an efficiency gains project? Because driving change is always a challenge.
Yeah, it was mostly coming from the heads of so documentary heritage, the head of that team, and the head of CIA. I think there had been talk about upgrading the API, and then Catherine, at the time, our HOD, she wanted us to be in Vernon because she had come from the art gallery where they were using Vernon. So it was a bit of both, I think. Yeah.
And are you seeing benefits yet from migrating all those diverse collections into one system?
Yes, for sure. We're already working with the human history team to work on joint acquisitions. So before if we ever had a joint acquisition with them, we would be putting our data into Presto and they'll be putting their data into Vernon. But now we just put it into the same record and all the conservators can feed into that record. So that's already started immediately. Like that was kind of the first thing that we were using it for with the other teams. And yeah, just having the other departments able to search our collections, because before they didn't have access to Presto, so they would search our collections online, which is that's also not a very good way to search for the collection. So they'll now be getting our records popping up, which is cool.
Did you have any project management support or change in communication support for this project?
I became the project manager by accident. It would have been good to have an actual project manager, and yeah, as Phil said, dedicated staff that didn't have the BAU that we had to kind of put aside. And obviously I had no experience in migrating and it was massive.
You did great. So
Phil did good too. Everyone did great, but yeah, it would have been good to have brought someone in as a project manager, I think.
So what was the most challenging part of the project, would you say?
Publications, hands down. Yeah. Everything went really smoothly until we got to publications. So it was probably good we worked on that last. But yeah, just making those, it's very strict cataloging, and but then it was also super messy data. It's very strange. I thought the librarians had it like sorted, but it was quite messy data, and then coming from free text to authority, and then there weren't enough fields to put that data into, so that's been a real headache, but we finally have it sorted.
And do think about the technological side too. So I talked about 32-bit Excel versus 64-bit, and 64-bit can handle big loads of data, whereas 32-bit can't. So
yeah, because some of our spreadsheets had 100,000 rows of data, so it could be a bit slow if you didn't have a good computer.
Most rewarding part of the project?
We had a lot of support, and a lot of support from our management and our colleagues. At times we were just almost burnt out, to be honest, and we had a lot of moral support.
Kind words, and very supportive. And also great for the CV.
And getting it done.
Yeah, we got it.
Getting it done.
Yeah.
Any other big collection data sets left to migrate?
No, it's all minor details. That's all going to be added as BAU.
Yeah, I didn't mention that one of the data sets was our acquisition records as well, and that was actually the last thing to go in. But yeah, there's nothing else left to import.
And any words of advice for anyone who is thinking about starting a similar project?
Hire a project team that don't have BAU museum work that they're already doing. Definitely.
At times, this quote springs to mind, which is stand up, stretch, take a walk, go to the airport, get on a plane, never return.
And also, yeah, Vernon have been great. So yeah, use Vernon as much as you can.
Yeah.
The team, I mean. Yeah, Penny did a lot of work for us, and thank God she did. We're happy to meet with anyone or talk to anyone who's going to start their own project.